There have been talks going on in Moscow between Turkey and Syria. Both countries have been talking about normalizing relations. The question is it going to happen? And if it does, will it last that long? Turkey and Syria have been enemies for years, going all the way back to the beginning of the Syrian uprising and the Syrian civil war. Turkey has launched a proxy war against the Bashar al-Assad regime. Erdogan himself stated that the ultimate reason for getting involved in that conflict was to topple Bashar al-Assad. So these are not friends. Turkey and Syria are not friends. Russia is trying to broker a diplomatic relationship between the two countries, but I think the reason why Russia is doing this is so that it can boost its own position in this whole geopolitical situation, in this whole geopolitical sphere. Russia is boosting up its image as a major superpower. Historically, Russia and Turkey have been enemies. There have been numerous wars fought between the two countries, and Turkey has lost every single one of them. Even when Turkey had its grand Ottoman Empire, the Turks lost against the Russians every single time. So Russia and Turkey are not friends. And Turkey controls the straits into the Mediterranean. Both Russia and Turkey have aspirations of being superpowers. They both want to be superpowers. Turkey wants to revive its old empire. So how can Russia and Turkey be friends when they are both historical enemies and they both want to be superpowers in an age when America is returning back to its legacy of isolationism? Eventually, Russia and Turkey are going to conflict. And Syria has made it very clear that in order to have normalization, Turkey needs to withdraw its troops from Syria. Well, if Turkey wants to revive itself as an empire, is it going to acquiesce to the demands of a neighboring enemy? And even if Turkey does acquiesce and concessions are made and Turkey withdraws its troops, it's not going to last that long. Because I find it very hard to believe that after years of waging a proxy war against Syria, all of a sudden, overnight, things are going to change. Now, it may be that Erdogan is a lot more reasonable than some of the people around him. Erdogan appears to be more reasonable than some of the other people around him and some of the other people who oppose him. I mean, they are some vicious, racist nationalists in Turkey. But even with that, Erdogan still put troops in northern Syria. Now, of course, he did it partially to fight against Kurdish nationalist terrorists. But at the same time, Erdogan made it very clear years ago that the ultimate reason for Turkey intervening in the Syrian conflict was to eventually topple Bashar al-Assad, who Erdogan has called a tyrant. So things may be peaceful in Syria. Things may get better. But I think, unfortunately, it's all going to be very temporary. It's not going to be a perpetual peace because you have Turkey and you have Russia, and they're both regional superpowers, and they both have aspirations for gaining more and more of a wider geopolitical leverage. And Turkey has this very, very advantageous position of controlling the straits into the Mediterranean, which would be vital for a Russian empire. Eventually, the two sides are going to conflict. Eventually, they're going to conflict because they have opposing interests. Just naturally, they have opposing interests. I mean, Russia wants to advance itself. Turkey wants to advance itself. Naturally, innately, they have opposing interests. Now you have the United States, which has been, over the years, returning back to its legacy of isolationism. And remember what President Trump said. And President Trump is a reflection of this trend of America going back into isolationism. But remember what President Trump said. He said, let someone else take care of Syria. And what did he mean by that? What he meant was allow the Turks to take care of Syria. And the United States agreed with Erdogan's policy of putting troops in northern Syria. And the United States still agrees with Turkey in this. So then what's going to happen? As America gradually goes back to its legacy of isolationism, it's going to rely more and more on the Turks. And the United States is going to empower the Turks, and they're going to further unleash the Turks in the Middle East. The Arabs have been working closer with Bashar al-Assad, which is quite amazing given the fact that Saudi Arabia was one of the major Middle Eastern countries. Probably after Turkey, the biggest of the Middle Eastern countries working against Bashar al-Assad. Saudi Arabia unleashed its own criminals onto Syria. Saudi Arabia heavily armed the rebels against Bashar al-Assad. So Saudi Arabia was a big player in the proxy war against Bashar al-Assad. Now the Saudis have been talking about normalizing relations. Now Syria has been invited into the next conference for the Arab League. So you have these major changes happening. Saudi Arabia and Syria were open enemies for years, but now it seems like they're cozying up to each other. What's happening? What's happening is the same thing that happened. It's the same reason, really, as to why Saudi Arabia worked to normalize relations with Israel. The Arabs are terrified of the Iranians. And a major ally for Iran is Syria. And so in order to isolate Iran, the Arabs want to get Syria more on their side because they want to weaken and reduce the influence of Iran. That's what this is about. Turkey hates the Arabs. They're racist against the Arabs. In fact, Turkish nationalists hate Arab-speaking people. They hate Semitic people. They hate them because Turks are not really Semites. Turks are a mixture of Greeks and other Indo-Europeans and Persians who all got mixed in together, and they eventually Islamized. Right? They got Islamized. That's what happened. At one point in time, they were all Greeks, or they were Indo-Europeans who got Hellenized. You know, the Trojans were an ancient people of Anatolia, and they weren't Greeks. They were some kind of Indo-European people. All those Indo-European people eventually got Hellenized, and those Hellenized Europeans of Anatolia eventually got Islamized and Turkified. And so the Turks hate the Arabs. America is going to further unleash Turkey in the Middle East because America wants to rely on another country to deal with the Middle East. What eventually will happen is Turkey is going to slaughter both the Arabs, and I believe eventually Turkey will attack the Jews because the Turks hate the Jews. Mein Kampf is a very popular book in Turkey. At one point in time, Mein Kampf was a bestseller in Turkey. So they hate the Jews. Yes, they have diplomatic relations. Yes, they have ties together. Yes, they have been friendly with each other for a very long time. But I think that anti-Jewish spirit and anti-Jewish sentiment, which is very strong in Turkey, is really going to rage forth, and it's going to be very, very bloody. And so America is right now creating a Frankenstein in the Middle East. It's kind of like Hitler. You know, a lot of people in America liked Hitler. I know it's hard to believe, right? Because you watch Schindler's List and you saw a bunch of Holocaust movies, so you think, oh, you know, this was all just Germany and all that. But no, people in Wall Street, a lot of very wealthy Americans, liked Hitler. Like, for example, the big Rockefeller industry loved Hitler. I think also IT&T loved Hitler. A lot of big, major industrialists, American industrialists, they loved Hitler and they supported Hitler. Ford, was probably the biggest example of that. Henry Ford loved Hitler. And they helped Hitler. They invested in Germany. They invested in the creation of the Third Reich. And America empowered Germany because it saw Germany as a weapon to use against the Soviets. And America created a Frankenstein that it lost control over. And that Frankenstein ended up butchering millions upon millions of people. We all know the story. So America right now is repeating the same evil that it did in the recent past. It's creating a Frankenstein. It's doing the same thing in Northeast Asia with its empowerment of the Japanese. Japanese nationalism is very strong. Japanese militarism is growing intensely as a trend. Well, what's happening? America is creating a Frankenstein. Trump made it very clear that he really didn't give a damn about Europe. In fact, he said he wanted to remove all the U.S. troops, or I think 1/3 of American troops, from Germany. That didn't happen because cooler heads prevailed in that case. And the reality is that if America pulls its troops out of Germany, the Germans will say, okay, let's revive our military power. And you're going to have a revived Reich in Europe. The only thing that's keeping Germany from going back to being a major European empire, or really the empire over Europe, is the United States. That's the only thing that's keeping Germany from reviving its military strength, is America's presence in Europe. And with American isolationism, what America is doing is it's empowering another Frankenstein. So that's what's happening. America has been creating Frankensteins for a very long time. When we removed Saddam Hussein and we empowered jihadists in Iraq, and when we empowered jihadis in Syria, we were creating Frankenstein. That's what we were doing. When we armed the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, we created a Frankenstein, and the manifestation of this Frankenstein was in the September 11th attacks. So that's what America has been doing. So eventually, with America supporting Turkey, this Frankenstein called Turkey is going to further be unleashed, and eventually it's just going to be completely unleashed, and it's going to be very dangerous. And with America withdrawing away from its position as the world's police, we are gradually entering we are leaving the unipolar world and entering a multipolar world. That's what's happening right now. We're seeing the formation of a multipolar world where you have these regional superpowers like Russia, like China, Japan, Turkey, rising up. So it's a very similar situation to China and Japan. Japan has aspirations of reviving its strength, reviving its power in Northeast Asia or East Asia. And so does China. China is rising up and wants to be the power in Asia. And so Japan and China are going to have a conflict eventually. Their interests conflict. One wants Chinese empowerment, one wants Japanese empowerment. So eventually, these two powers are going to conflict. They are historical enemies. Japan butchered millions of Chinese people during the Second World War. Japan has had 2 wars with China, both of which China lost. And Japan committed a genocide on the Chinese people, which it still hasn't really fully apologized for, and which many Japanese politicians even deny ever happened. So this is the dark reality of the world we live in. I mean, we have this veneer of civility and diplomacy, but behind that veneer, we have all sorts of historical tensions, historical antagonisms, very, very dark pasts, genocides which haven't really been seriously accounted for, like, for example, what Ukraine did to the Poles back in the 1940s. And with all of that, we have hatreds that are just bottled up. And I think eventually they're just going to explode. I think that's what's going to happen. Turkey and Russia, Turkey and Armenia. We've seen a little bit of that manifesting, that historical hatred just re-manifesting itself with the war in Nagorno-Karabakh and Turkey backing the Azeris to slaughter the Armenians. That right there was an historical evil coming back through the veneer of diplomacy. So it's all going to explode in the end. This is the reality. Anyway, that's my talk for tonight. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.